So then we get to my mom's side of the family. I know that my great-great-grandfather, pretty sure it was my great-great-grandfather, and it might go further back, was a very small farm. They didn't have a whole lot of animals, because I remember my grandfather telling story. He was telling me, well, when he had his stroke, there when he was riding around somewhere, he was telling me about how that, because I mean his hands were fucking huge, and he said, well, that's mostly probably from milking cows by hand, so that proves how long he's been around the block. And then again, really the whole electricity and automobile and automated dairy system really probably didn't kick on in our area till like probably 60s, 70s around here. Because my grandfather, he grew up around here and worked for a few other farms in the area. And so he would and the funny thing is where my mother's house is actually family land, which is where my grandpa's farm used to be. So I pretty much grew up on the farm. I didn't have to travel much. If I wanted to go over to my Grammy and Grandpa's, I just walk out the door, walk across the pasture, across the road, walk across the road, and I was at their house. Of course, my mother would freak out if you didn't tell her you was going there and you just took off. But she would always call grandmother first, and grandmother would be like, yeah, they're here. Or vice versa. If you left my grandparents' house and was headed home, because, our mother was home, and we didn't tell grandmother, but it's almost like everybody knew who to call first, either to call my uncle or my other uncle or my mother first. It's weird how that worked. And the other funny thing is that where my grandfather was born, and where my great-grandparents lived for a long time. I don't know when they moved out of there, but I know they lived there for a long time. Is actually down the road that way about half mile, maybe 3/4 of a mile. So to say that our family's been in the same spot for a long time is a understatement. We've been, you can say we've been farming the same ground for a long time, which the farm, I think the farm that my cousin owns now, or my grandfather, was family land. The barn burnt. They used to have a big old 2-story house and a big old barn. I wish I could find pictures of that too, but I gotta ask my grandmother, but she won't probably know because she doesn't know half the pictures she has. But I think my grandfather told me that he wanted that because, it was a big-ass barn. Big barn. And he was going to get that, but because I remember him saying something about, he told somebody just to wait till he got back from the Navy, which he didn't really go into the Navy. He was a Navy firefighter, but didn't last very long because I guess he didn't like being bossed around, but that's another thing about our family. My mom's side doesn't really take too well to being bossed around. They take better to being their own bosses and doing it, doing stuff their way, the way they know how to do it. So that's always in my blood, that side of the family of, it's going to be done my way or you get fucking lost is kind of how it works. So that's why I'm better being my own boss and then being somebody else's hired man. And then he come home. I know he worked with my great-grandfather for a long time at the dealership and running fuel truck, because he was like, and now to keep in mind, my grandfather also, I guess, didn't really feel like going to high school, so he dropped out at like 16, and he was a smart motherfucker. He before his dementia really kicked in and all that stuff really kind of started kicking him in the ass, you ask him something I mean, he was smart. I mean, but anyways, and then I know he went and moved to a town. I can't remember if it's that would be northeast of here. No, it's not northeast. That might be northeast of here, I guess, a little ways. Only about 10, 20 miles. He went down there and started milking cows, but at the time, well, he was milking cows down there, and this proves that he was milking cows, and at the time, it was, and of course, and the one nice thing about, great grandpa having the dealership was that if my grandfather needed a new piece of Alice Chalmers equipment or whatever, he could, go get it or buy it, so yeah, he talked about the farm that they bought in a town called New Sharon, which is like, I think it's about 20 miles from here. It's not that far. It's like a maybe 2-3 minute drive. If it depends on if you really floorboard it. And at that time, he was, and this proves, I guess the age, because my grandmother was the barn cleaner and the milk pipeline. So that tells you the age of when they was milking cows there. So I guess they sold that place. Then they moved up to another farm. Not another farm. He went to go work for somebody cutting wood, which is another thing. My family on my mom's side is very heavily into the wood cutting business, or was. My grandfather, both my uncles cut wood. My uncle and grandfather cut wood for a short stint, and my uncle sold a skidder, and I think my grandfather sold a skidder, and so forth and so forth. My uncle's really the only one with a skidder left, and that skidder is probably going to be sold at some point, whether me or my brother or my cousin buys it, I don't know. But so then they, I guess, moved around. Then they come back to where they farm now, which I don't know when that was. I just know that they come back to where they are now. And this was, I think, probably the 70s, because I know my mother and my uncle were born, or my uncle and then my mother, and then they built at the place now. They built a house. They got the land. They took over paying the taxes on the land because I guess the taxes were overdue from a family member, and my grandfather cleared the fields, built the house, built the garage, and built the shop, and built the barn, which it wasn't, and the barn wasn't no fancy. It's a fucked up freestall is what it is. It's nothing fancy. It's fucked up. It's really fucked up barn, because the way it's set up is you got your two, and you could almost call it a composted bed pack, but it wasn't a true one. But you had an area for the cows and an area for the cows. And then you had your drive-through alley, which that is the nice thing about the barn is you could drive the hay wagons through, which he also stacked on a wagon. I guess apparently my family has a thing against kicker balers. But you could drive the wagon through, and you had this side of the barn. So if you're looking at the barn from the road down into the barnyard, the hay was stored on this side and cows on this side, and then the cows would walk up from the barn up to the parlor, which I think it was a double 8. I can't remember. I can't remember what size parlor it was. But the barn is fucked up because, so the road sits up, and then the driveway down to the barn goes down. So all the water heads down into the barn, and the barn it's just not right. I think it was, from near what I can tell, it was done in a pinch because he wanted to milk cows, so he just threw something together that was semi-decent for the time, and it worked in his head, and it apparently worked all those years for however long they milked cows. Which brings up another point. He never was, I guess at this time, he never really bought new equipment, it's always kind of interesting to me that how my one grandfather on one side could buy brand new equipment and fairly brand new equipment, and then when he first started out, my grandfather on my mom's side started out, he could get new equipment from my great-grandfather. Then after that, he quit the dealership, which the dealership only ran, I think, 53 to 63, so not very long. The farm went, and he bought, now, he didn't own the D17 or any of the tractors I'm on. The tractor I'm sitting on right now till way later in years. Obviously about the CA. But I know that he had a Alice Chalmers 200, which I'd like to find where the fuck that tractor went, a D19 and a D14. But for the longest time, he only had the D14 and the D19. And then I don't know when the 200 came along. But the D19 was a 6-cylinder gas and the 200 was a diesel, but that thing had so many problems. Like, I guess the hydraulic PTO was fucked up that it couldn't even spin a tether over. It was bad. And the D14 had a loader on it and was the loader tractor and did everything else, which he had that that D14 for a long time. I don't remember when he bought it and but it was in, that tractor been around, and of course my uncle got rid of it when it was given to him. But yeah, so yeah. But yeah, so I'll be right back.